Interviews with JEAN-LUC AYOUN. Agapè binder. Liege yourself. Part 2. October 11, 2020. Architecture, form and ether. Bodies of light, dense and subtle bodies, 7 bodies, 12 bodies. Information centers, chakras, gates, stars, black hole. The matrix constellation. Well, so today we're going to talk, as I was saying this morning, about providing you with scaffolding if you prefer architecture, the structure related to what we call a form. Indeed, the consciousness that it is a mineral, plant, animal, human and the atom also, I would even say the constituents of atoms, whether we consider particles as undulatory or corpuscular, it is always a form. There can be no consciousness if there is no form. I'm going to talk to you about what constitutes the form, and we are going to come to the conclusion, in about an hour and a half, that consciousness is always linked to a form, whether this form is defined, of course, by the different physical components, or whether it is defined even by a wave, the wave theory. Evidently the consciousness of a mineral is not the consciousness of a human being. The consciousness of an elementary particle has nothing to do with the consciousness of an archangel. What this means is that we will show that the form is supported by the consciousness. Without form, there is no consciousness. Consciousness is not only related to perception and sensation, translator, and to what, but depends, above all, on the characteristics of the form and especially on the movement of the form. Today I prefer to speak of form rather than dimension, because if there were no form, wave or corpuscular, there could not be the slightest expression, the slightest manifestation of any consciousness. Where does form come from? I'll give you a schematic proposal. By the way, at the end of the binder, a few days later, I'll send you a number of documents in PDF format, most of them, but also photos of what is called the Kirlian effect, for example, which will give you visual evidence that there is a canvas of form, a matrix of form, which is a prerequisite for form. Of course, the form can be, in these physical components, but also in these components of movement, of length, of width, of color. Form and consciousness are linked. We're going to start, of course, from the most palpable, the most physical form, which we all know well since we are inside it, which I have named the human body. So obviously I am not going to talk about the anatomical or even physiological constitution of what the human being is. I leave that to medicine and psychology, but we are going to have to talk about what underlies a form, what organizes a form. When you see the images of what we call the Kirlian effect, the ghost effect, you will see the illustration of what I am telling you now. Every shape is organized, prepared by a set of factors related to what we could call, very summarily, information. Information in its broadest sense is what makes it possible to arrange the form. In esoteric language, I would tell you that when a clairvoyant, a medium looks at a flower bud, for example, he is able to see on a more subtle plane the shape of the future leaf. I will also send you back a number of bibliographies, because I don't have the time to talk about that, of course. Just note that this matrix of shape, remember the human as an angel, or as a proton in the nucleus obeys a program, a movement and something that generates this shape. More than 30 years ago a gentleman named Rupert Sheldrake found what are called morphogenetic fields. There's a prefiguration of the form, or if you prefer a shaping that is induced by something invisible to us, which we call by a very broad term, the ether, or if you prefer the etheric. This famous morphogenetic field that we also find even in a crystal, at this point in time we will no longer call it a morphogenetic field, because there is no genetics, but we will call it a reproductive morphofield, morphogenesis, morphogenetic. This subtle form is therefore a program that codes for the appearance of a form. This means that there is a pre-existence of information in relation to form. The ether, the etheric body of man, is charged with information, this information providing a framework for manifestation, but also the memories of the form. An electron will always move in a determined way. Human and animal behavior, but also that of matter in the physical sense, obeys these programs, these memories, and this is what we call life. In a first time we could say that the form, the life, the consciousness in all its components, from the subconscious, the unconscious, the conscious, the superconscious, as well as all that we name the dimensions, obey to a program. There's the illusion of a freedom. There's the illusion of something that endures, something that is eternal, whether it is human memories, whether it is the curves of the corpuscle or the wave of the electron. Remember that there's always causality in form and causality in consciousness. The more we go back up in the subtle architecture, as soon as we go beyond what we call the ether, as life is organized, there's a complexification. Human beings, we can talk about molecules, proteins, cells, nerves. For a mineral, a crystal, the structure is always the same. There's therefore for all that is living, for all that is consciousness, a program and a project that we can define according to the sectors of this world. Of course, this project, this programming, is obviously the result of a cause. Translator, a cause comes from a so-called first cause. This first cause is beyond all form and light. I mention morphogenetic fields very briefly. I can evoke in the same way the unified field theory, string theory, or for those who know, everything that has been demonstrated by Nassim Haramein, who says exactly the same thing through everything he says, everything he teaches. Remember that what I am telling you here is a frame of reference, and as I said in the preamble, Agapè, which is not consciousness, which is not light, is the purest, most perfect information from which life, consciousness and form come. We are countless on this earth, today, for some years now, living Agapè. Often the words that we find, in all these brothers and sisters who live this, are always the same. There's no movement, there's no time, there's no space, there's no distance, there's no form, there's just perfection. The only perfection that we're all, without exception, constantly searching for is this remembrance of the ultimate to the absolute. You have countless people, and I apologize for not being able to name them because there are too many of them now, and when they access this causal ultimate field, it is the great silence, the absence of consciousness, the absence of observer, and that is the moment when we are complete, and that is the moment when, in a very real and effective way, we see concretely the worlds of form, the worlds of consciousness, the universes, the whole of creation as a dream. The analogy I often take, consciousness is linked to form, form and movement are linked to life, but the life of form is not life with a capital L. Understand that there is no possible demonstration, and it is something you have to verify by your own lived experience, your mind, your intellect in the noble sense. Even if you have an IQ greater than 200, it is of no use to you to live this. On the other hand, there exists, in the understanding of what I am going to develop, the architecture, the worlds of form and consciousness, and because of the eternal and ephemeral circumstances of this world at the moment, which we can begin to describe as chaos, that the experience of that great silence will be found, which will really put an end to the total swindle of what we call life in form, which is only a dream, today rather a nightmare. To be liberated from the form is not to leave this world, it is not to explore other dimensions, it is to realize through the lived experience that all this is only passing and that none of it is real, and yet it is within our individuality, within the dream itself, or the nightmare, that we must individually live and experience that there is no individual person. In this binder, especially on the last day, I've inserted what I have called living the natural state, which will in fact be more revealing to what I could call the psychology of Agapè. This psychology of Agapè has nothing to do with energy, the opening of the chakras, the activation of the stars, the doors, the crowns. I'm going to come back to all these different words, don't worry, and that all these things that we are currently experiencing have only one purpose, to make us remember, beyond all memory, what the real is and to make us live it. So, using a somewhat esoteric language, there's ascent and descent, since that finality, if we can say Agapè, goes far beyond what we have called the Agapè resonances, but makes us live right here in the midst of the nightmare of the dream, total freedom. This freedom is not external, it can only be internal, and when I speak of internal freedom, at that moment you are really free of your memory, of all the memories of forms, and the results are not waiting in your life. In this life within the dream or the nightmare, many behavioral, physiological and psychological changes are manifested. As I always say, whoever is going to live the real of the truth can no longer be deceived, manipulated, abused by any form. The form is only passing, and I am not only talking about the interval between birth in this world and death in this world, but will also make you discover the swindle of spirituality and consciousness. As Eckhart Tolle and so many others taught, there is only the present instant. This present instant does not depend on time, does not depend on any matrix, any intelligence, and that is where you remember. So it is not an experience that lasts 2 minutes, it is a permanent state, unspeakable, indissoluble. It is when Nisargadatta and so many others have said, you were never born, you were never dead, and you are perfect from all eternity. The present circumstances of creation and dreaming is the only opportunity that cannot be missed by anyone, by any form, by any consciousness, and by any universe. The resolution of the creation myth puts an end to all beliefs, all projections, all memories, whether they are related to the soul, reincarnation, spirit, or light. When you live this, you cannot be deceived, you cannot be mistaken. There is an unshakable certainty that puts a total end to suffering. Beware, I did say to suffering, not to pain, because as long as we are in a form, we are subject to the world of death, to pain, and, of course, to suffering. An Agapè, as they say, a human who lives agape no longer needs a frame of reference, no longer has a question, he himself is the answer. There's nothing to look for, there's nothing to seek. So of course we will see in particular, in the neurosciences tomorrow, that Agapè is present in the human structure, whether it be in the cell, in the energy, in the vibration, in the silence, but also in the anatomy and neurophysiology of our skull, and all this I will develop tomorrow. Don't lose sight of the fact that in these talks that we are going to live for 3 days, the goal is that once we have understood intellectually, once we have felt and lived Agapè, which will be the case on the 12th or 13th evening with OMA, the 13th evening in what has been called the cosmic Agapè, and when you live this, even everything I am going to develop there, is no longer of any interest. The interest today is that my experience, whether it is medical, whether it is mystical, whether it is neuroscientific, it simply allows me to allow you to understand, turns off. Just a moment, I'm settling, because here with the phone, it's much smaller. That's it. So, that's it, we were at, let's start again, if you don't mind. Excuses. So what I propose to you now is, in a very short time, in less than an hour, to go to these different subtle planes, knowing that these subtle planes, which we call subtle bodies, have an extremely precise architecture. So, of course, I'm not going to talk again about chakras, or energies, or vibrations, or gates, or stars. Translator, you already talked about that JEAN-LUC. Yes, I know. But now we're really going to talk. Translator, okay. Let's schematize. Since earlier, I've been talking about the ether or the etheric body, if you like. So this etheric body is the matrix of form, it's a vibratory field, so it's a form with characteristics, of course, like human biological anatomy and physiology. It is not a question here of tracing the chakras, the gates, the stars, what is energy, what is vibration. I have talked a lot about all this, and you have countless authors who have been talking for millennia about the chakras, the wheels of energy. What I would like you to remember above all is that the ether, the etheric body, is the matrix of life, the matrix of form. What we used to call, a year ago, the Christic matrix, is the place where the origin of form will be found. If today we have innumerable brothers and sisters who live Agapè, without necessarily having followed a path of openness, a spiritual path, an energetic path, all this, so now I have a problem. Hold on a moment. It's okay. The problem is that on the phone, it's very small. There, I've changed. Yes. So, before going into the details of the ether, there's on the invisible level, we're now refocusing on the human. Classically, there are 7 bodies. The physical body that we know, the etheric body that many brothers and sisters know, who have lived through the opening of the gates, the opening of the chakras, the new bodies that we will see afterwards. The etheric body is going to be submitted. Imagine a little bit of nested nesting dolls, these bodies that have been named by tradition. the etheric body, the astral body, the mental body, the causal body, the so-called spiritual or Buddhist body, and finally the seventh body, which we could call a body without a body, and which we call the Atman, for example in Ayurveda, which has also been named in Buddhism, the atom germ. All these bodies are nested within each other, and each one is going to have feedback paths, regulation paths. The astral body and the emotional body or body of desire will evidently directly influence the physical body. Example: you have a very strong emotion, you will feel physically that it takes you in the throat or in the belly. There, it is the emotion that communicates with the physical body. We know all this very well at the neuroscientific level. I will talk about it tomorrow. So we have a kind of bag, as Biddy would say. You have a bag of meat, the physical body, which obeys the etheric body. The bag of information and energy, which itself is controlled by the astral body, the body of desire, which is also the body of the ego, the body of subtle forms, the entities, and I put in there all the entities: angel, archangel, jinn, demon, larda, in short, everything that is subtle and that has the characteristic of being mobile, fleeting and colorful. Above it, we have the mental body. So, as I said, I'm not going to go into the details of all this, although that's not the point today. The goal is to give you this overall vision of functioning so that you can be free from the very idea of being a form, of being in a world, of having to evolve, of having to suffer. All that today makes no sense, because today the human being who is capable, as Christina was saying this morning, who is capable in the space of an instant to make the silence of his projections, the silence of his very words, the silence of that body, or if you prefer the immobility of the body, and if he settles into this emptiness, in a way, it is not a meditation. I have often used the word acceptance. Translator: there was a cut. I've often used the word acceptance, embrace. In other words, if you're available for the instant, for the silence, no matter what or who goes through your subtle backs, you are going to immobilize without any will, what we call energy, emotions, thoughts, and at that point you're available to find yourself. This is done in immediacy, and I would say especially when there is an emergency, when there is suffering, and even when there is a rational or irrational fear. What I mean by that, and this we will develop on the fourth day, is that if you're able to observe, to listen to what is happening without projecting, without reacting, whatever the event or the circumstance, if you put yourself in home, if you don't seek to analyze, to understand, but if you're fully available in the instant and available in the instant, you will be free instantly. You do not need to put an end to beliefs. You don't need to ask yourself if it is true, if it is false. You don't have to judge the instant. Whether you're angry, whether you're joyful, whether you're suffering, makes no difference. What I have called, what has been called sacrifice, ultimately is only the sacrifice of illusion. The sacrifice of the illusion of form and consciousness places you automatically without any effort, in the present instant, in zero time and in Agapè. It actually seems so simple, so absurd that no one can believe it. Of course, you can't believe it, but if you accept this, you will live it. It is the opening of countless brothers and sisters today who have never heard of energy, they don't even feel it, who have never heard of chakras, of gates, of stars, of vibrations, and yet they are living the truth. That is to say, this space without space, this time without time, where you are going to remember, if I may say so, who you are. And we are all the same. Nisargadatta/Biddy in his lifetime expressed this thing in the following way: the only difference between you and me. Then he used the word God, but in Eastern terminology, not the God Yatebit, the divisor, as it is used in the West. Biddy said, the only difference between you and me is that I know that I am God and you don't know it yet. Today, and we'll talk about this at other times, whether it's in neuroscience, astrophysics, astrology if you will, and even brain chemistry. We know what Agapè's condition is. Tomorrow I will tell you about the countless changes that occur in the skull, in the brain, what happens when there's Agapè. Agapè doesn't happen anywhere else but here and now in this dream or in this nightmare. So we have, then, a number of backs, subtle bodies if you like to put it nicely, which are all interrelated, interconnected, and I would say, feedback, retroactive with each other. And then, since 1984, new bodies, new frequencies have appeared. It was all the work, this time, of channeling other dimensions, which was to explain, to bring to life and to accompany the reappearance of these new bodies. I'm not going to talk about gates and stars again. You have enough teaching on this subject, and I am absolutely not the first to have talked about these new bodies. Long before it first appeared in 1984, an American author who died today, an author named JEAN-LUC, wrote, received an automatic writing, first Khalil Gibran to write the sequel from the Garden of the Prophet, and thus JEAN-LUC also channeled John Lennon who told him before 1984 that 5 new frequencies were going to enter into manifestation on Earth. I'll sum up 30 years there, if you like. The reception of these new frequencies, in relation to what we called at the time ODRIM is AL, the points that resonate with these new bodies, have been activated. The purpose of all this has been to install, right here on this earth, another bag that does not care about the physical, etheric, mental, astral, causal bag. We could call this body the body of eternity, the body of light, the immortal body. In the Bible it is called, I believe, the seamless body. And so from 2011 onwards, many human brothers and sisters received it, but when I talk about reception, it is not a real reception. In history, the bodies of eternity were prisoners in the sun. In October 2011, the release of the crystal core of the earth took place. This means that at that moment, all the immortal bodies, from which we had been cut off, came down from the sun. But when I say came down from the sun, one could just as easily say that it was the emanation of the heart that freed our inner sun. This immortal body, this body of eternity is still a form. Whatever the matrix and manifestation of your body of eternity, I will not go back to what was called at the time stellar lineages and stellar origins. And therefore this body of eternity that allowed us to resonate and be connected to the primary information prior to the form, was made possible for all humans. As Christina said this morning, since she brought Agapè into the company, what a few years ago would have led to a breach of contract for her coaching, today is accepted by business leaders, by managers, by executives. Therefore, it is enough to affirm, possibly define what Agapè is. Its true Greek etymological meaning, which I remind you, is simply God's love for men, unconditional love, which makes no conditions, which makes no difference between forms, whether it is our own child or any child. There can be no preference, there can be no opinion. There's just the real of Agapè, which is translated by this ineffable joy, what we had named a few years ago the naked joy, without object and without subject, is today accessible by everyone as soon as you accept the good news. It is enough to be in front of someone you don't know, you have never seen, who has a definite function within any company. But it can also be a chance meeting of someone who is sitting in front of you or next to you on the train or in transportation. If you smile, if you're present to yourself, if you're in silence, then your smile, your words, your definitions of Agapè, after the first surprise, will trigger on the other by resonance, by sympathy, by empathy, whatever, even by mimicry, will open the other to the possibility of zero time. Oh, wait, now the phone has been closed. I hope there won't be a cut because as I'm on the phone, the battery is much less powerful. Well, we'll see. The one who lives Agapè, who smiles, who embraces the other, the trained neighbor, the company manager, if you're able to be natural, by simply evoking this notion of Agapè and smiling, the natural state will reveal itself to the other. For the past 2.5 years, we have had countless testimonies of quite incredible lived experiences. Remember, all you have to do is be kind, all you have to do is accept and embrace the other of the situation. There's no question of understanding, there's no question of analyzing, there's a need to be present. If you're present with your trained neighbor, even without talking to him, if you're present with the patient in the hospital as a caregiver, simply by your presence, by your silence, by your acceptance and your welcome, you will find that the other, the neighbor, the patient, the business manager, or the very circumstances of your mood, your life, your mind, will change instantly. The new resilience is there. It is not an effort, it is not a surpassing of oneself, but it is a form of crossing the illusion, where all the veils of illusion will be torn. It is a state that I would describe as extreme lucidity. There's no thought, no emotion, no will to anything. At the moment you're in the natural state, you are truthful, and, above all, the other one, your train mate, the company manager, the sick person in bed, will resonate with what you are. This will also be free proofs that will be repeated every day. As Omrem said at the time, if you put love in front of them, if you don't let them appear without restraining them, but when you see them, there will be no reaction. And there you are available for you, for the other, or for the circumstance. And at that moment, you will be crossed, you will live this great silence. It doesn't matter if it is called presence or absence, they are the two sides of the same coin, and there you will see, as many brothers and sisters, and as Christina said this morning, that every human being, without exception, is capable of recognizing himself through what you're in the state of embrace, of abandonment, of unwillingness. So of course, at first it was much easier for those who perceived the ether, for those who felt the energies, who felt the vibrations. I would like to point out, even if I don't have time to dwell on this, that energy and vibration should not be confused. It has nothing to do with it. Energy is something that circulates, that sets in motion. It's even the definition of the term energos. It's the aptitude of a system to provide mechanical work. With the Chinese, Kai, energy, is the water that circulates between two banks. It's a movement, it's an emotion, which sets in motion. Whereas vibration is a resonance on the spot, static. So there is no possible correlation between energy and vibration. Which still leaves many people still in the illusion that energy is not a vibration. It's totally different. In Ayurvedic medicine we talk about prana, for example, vitality, as opposed to what we call the Chitta plan. The Chitta plane is what Sri Aurobindo called the supramental, but the supramental is not a finality, contrary to what Sri Aurobindo and so many others thought. The supramental is a means that corresponds to the reactivation of the body of eternity from the heart of the sun, and it is precisely this eternal body, this immortal body that is there, that has made it possible to find time zero, the great void. Christiane Simmer, the French author, said on her deathbed, before she died, this essential phrase, which is a lived experience and not a concept. She said this: when there is nothing more, when the body and the personality are being erased, that is when we realize that there is everything. And it is there that we live concretely, that we're all, without exception. And when I say all, here I am not only talking about humans, but from the elementary particle to the multiverse, to the very source, we're all within each other. Creation is a dream in which we have believed, in which we have participated, but which fades away by itself, from the moment that yourselves are present in the present instant, and present to yourselves, as well as totally present to this world, may freedom find you. Once again, these are not concepts. What I am talking about are lived experiences. You know, many years ago, 2 years ago, beyond my intellect and my knowledge, beyond all my work and energetics for 25 years, beyond all that, there's this great void, where you see yourselves that there's no one. It is not a concept, it is not intellectual, it is a real lived experience. Since 2010, 10 years ago, I have had countless opportunities to visit, if I may say so, countless worlds, countless dreams, countless dimensions, but the only moment that is true, that will never pass, is the moment when there is the great silence, the moment when you disappear to yourselves, when you find yourselves again. All the rest, and all that we see today of brothers and sisters who, in order to escape the awakening, need to project themselves into a new land, a new dimension, where everything is peace and quiet. That does not exist. They are only projections and visions of consciousness, because consciousness, like the ego, cannot accept for a moment that it is not real. I completely agree with Nisargadatta when he said that creation will pass, that creation is only passing, but you will never pass. You don't have to believe or deny what I say until you have verified it for yourselves. I'm not trying to convince anyone of the validity of what I am saying to you, because I don't need to persuade anyone, because all creation is called to live it. Then some people will put forward, after having followed certain Eastern teachings or elsewhere, reincarnation, sin, good, evil, so they think they have to evolve to be perfect. Creation cannot be perfect, neither here nor elsewhere. It is something that passes away, that has nothing real, and yet it is our only reality. And I take this opportunity to come back to the ether now, not just your atomic body or the atomic body of anything, but the ether in its original definition, and I often say, you are space. When you're no longer subject to form, even while in this human form, then you're living the truth. Truth is one. It does not depend on a point of view, and it certainly does not depend on evolution or involution. It's all about cycles. Everything that is cyclical involves movement and displacement, according to timelines, according to the notion of space, according to the notion of dimensions, but all this is unreal. The only reality that is accessible to us and that allows us to live the real Agapè is this vehicle of flesh, and it's not because you're going to travel as I did in 2010, under the wings of Michael, or that I was able to live the same way as Carlos Castaneda described, whether with entheogens, products, or naturally. At that moment you're in the immutability of silence, in an absolute beatitude, and you see all the worlds around you as spheres nested within each other, with all its planes, all its dimensions, all its forms, and you see that all this does not exist. When we tell you that, because we are living it, because it is a dream, for AYOUN explained it at length, all the wise men of the East and the West and elsewhere have told us, you don't have to accept it or believe it, but it is up to you to live it. So the architecture of all these spaces, these bodies, these backs, we started with 7 bodies, at least for the human, we now have 12 bodies. If you're interested, I refer you to the years 2009 and 2010, on the teaching of other dimensions, and I say and I repeat that today you no longer need all that, and yet I am talking to you about that, because it is the best way to put an end to what you believe to be your history, or the history of the world or of creation. You are God, as Biddy said. Accept it, and you are. But if you put a religion in front, if you put a master in front, a guide, if you put your beliefs in Allah, Jesus, Buddha, or anyone else, you will never be free. But I assure you, we will all be free. But you are building walls that prevent you from living the truth. Understand that I am not asking anyone to give up anything or anyone, but that it is an intimate understanding that will make you go beyond believing, or not believing, or searching, and that this is how, in awe, or amazement, or astonishment, you will be free. That is to say, you no longer depend on the astral matrix, you no longer depend on history, especially you no longer depend on any spiritual authority, and you're no longer subject to illusion. Now, enough of us have been living it long enough to demonstrate the process. All you care about holds you. Everything you believe in locks you up. And, in reality, I've had the chance, or the opportunity, or the way to live all these worlds, all these dimensions, to have total liquidity, whether in this world or in any world. Well, it's all for nothing at all. The truth is simple, the real is unshakable, it doesn't care about what you think, it doesn't care about what you project, it doesn't care about your fears. It simply needs your acceptance. I took the example earlier of the caregivers, or the passenger next to you on the train. It's much easier to make a business leader live this naturally, than someone who is subject to a religion or belief in evolution. To believe in evolution is to believe that you're imperfect, creation will always be imperfect, but you're perfect. This is where you discover that there is no one, and that there is no worse than spiritual teachings, there is no worse obstacle than feeling things, because it takes you away from silence. Someone who is dying, or a company director who no longer knows what to do for his company, or your neighbor on the train, is going to be more receptive, because he is more available for resilience, because he is not in the effort, he is not in the spiritual projections, he is not in the energetic, vibratory or other perceptions, and somehow these beings are today much closer to the real and to his living, than all those still very many who nourish history. And yet I am the first for those who know me to comment the story, because the story makes me laugh. It is dramatic, but I know that there is nothing dramatic about the finality. And let me smile. This smile is neither mocking nor anything else. When I see all these projections, all these worlds, all these devils, all these geneticist mothers, these archons, these angels, these archangels, which I have assiduously frequented and channeled, are the ultimate lure. There's only you and there's no one, there's freedom and there's the real. So, we will take a break in a few minutes to resume for the third part of this day, and I will finish this sad song, and where we'll have, to close, what we vulgarly call a channeling of the impersonal. For those who know, no problem, but for those who are going to discover, don't look for the meaning of the words, the meaning of the sentences. You will have all the time afterwards to dissect on the transcriptions of the audios, but I will simply ask you to be the most present and the most available to let be what is. I will leave the word to Christina, since we are arriving at 18 o'clock. Translator for Christina. Thank you JEAN-LUC, thank you very much. Have a good snack. See you soon. Through JEAN-LUC AYOUN. Less transformations. English Revised Translation, LMF.